Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for watching. Well, leasing the Turnpike is maybe one of the hottest subjects in the state government debate going on in Harrisburg these days. We have a guy on the program who thinks, well, maybe it's not such a hot idea. And then on the other side, how about taxing oil company gross profits? We have a guy coming on who doesn't think that's such a hot idea. What a program. Stay with us when we return.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, it doesn't get any better than this. I mean, leasing the Turnpike has been just vigorously debated. People are for it, people are against it, people are not so sure. Well, I have as my special guest today Steve Herzenberg. He's the executive director of the Keystone Research Center. And I think I got this right, Stephen, an MIT PhD, right?
In economics, yes.
In economics. Well, I was getting there.
Okay.
I was getting there. We got to start with a PhD first
Sure
in
enough.
economics. Well, 2 PhDs on the program. This is going to be dangerous. At any rate, welcome.
Good
Look,
to be here.
Your research center, you have a view of this that's a little different than I think some of the folks that we've had on this program. I don't know that we've gotten vigorously into this debate yet. You're not so sure leasing the Turnpike is a great idea, are you?
No, we're not. Now, we would start by saying there is one good thing about this debate from our perspective. This debate now accepts the idea that we do need to invest more in our transportation infrastructure.
Right.
Numbers like $1.7 billion total in mass transit and in roads.
And bridges.
So I think that's
Right.
that's an important consensus.
And everybody understands that, you know, the mass transit, you know, ridership's up, but so are fees, cost structure, some problem. We've got thousands of miles of state roads and something like 50% of the bridges in the state in disrepair. So you're right. Go ahead. We all agree on that.
That's right. And even the conservative folks have accepted that infrastructure,
Right.
investing in that infrastructure is really important to our economy. Now, so the question is, how do we raise that money? Here's the basic problem with Turnpike leasing from our perspective. The Turnpike is really a cash cow. So you raise a certain amount of money every year. Basically, what you're doing with Turnpike leasing is you're giving half of the cash cow or 2/3 of the cash cow to the private company that leases it. Let me give you a specific example from Toronto. In Toronto, there's a Highway 407 that goes around the city. It was built for $1.5 billion. It was sold in April 1999 for $3.1 billion. Good deal. They made some money. 5 years later, that private company sold it to another private company for $6.3 billion. Right. 5 years in a row, they had toll increases. Bottom line, the private company did what made sense to maximize profits. It raised tolls. Half of the money, more than half of the money, ends up not in the public coffers, not investing in our future, but in the hands of the private operator.
Now, in some kind of perspective, Governor Rendell makes the argument that this deal could bring the state about $11 billion, as you point out, $1.7 billion into each year, which we estimate to be our annual cost to do the roads and bridges and help the mass transits out. And he says you could put limits on the toll pike fees and you could mandate some things to the leaser, I guess, right? Tell me why is that not a good idea?
Again, Rendell, the governor, is right and deserves credit for saying we've got to get some more money. Okay? But the problem is, sure, you can put limits on how much they can increase tolls, but then you're not going to get as much money from the private operator. So you can't have it both ways. If we want to make a lot of money up front and get a lot of interest on those bonds to finance the infrastructure year to year, then we're going to have to let them raise tolls through the roof. If we don't let them do that, then we're not going to get the money we need. And again, bottom line, we're giving away somewhere between 50 and 65 cents on the dollar. Why would we want to do that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. But let me ask you this question. One of the things that I've often wondered is why we have this Turnpike. You know, there are some other options. We got big Route 80 over there. We don't do anything with that. You can ride across Route 80 and you don't pay any fees. One of the possibilities is to take Route 80 and, you know, turn it into a toll road. And some other options there with the people who use it. Good or bad idea?
I think in general, those are things that you need to be playing with. You could toll Route 80 and some of the other roads in the state. You might be able to raise the tolls to some extent on the turnpike itself. It's like if it's a cash cow,
right,
maybe we're not milking it often enough and getting enough milk from it. Those things make sense. When the public sector does them, we get to keep all the revenue.
All right, we're going to go to break. We're talking with Steve Herzenberg from the Keystone Research Center. We've had, the Commonwealth Foundation, a little more conservative. Keystone Research Center, a little more labor, a lot of labor financing. All, full disclosure here. We want both points of view, which is important. We'll be back with Stephen after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Pennsylvania Medical Society. Doctors and patients, preserve the relationship. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back. I'm talking with Stephen Herzenberg from the Keystone Research Center. All right, Stephen, an economist, by the way, I want to point out another PhD, which is dangerous to have two of us on a program. Stephen, let me one of the things that I often wonder, and I don't know why we didn't, we've got this turnpike that runs from New Jersey on one end to Ohio on the other. You've got these access points all over the place, right? Why didn't we do more? Why don't we do more to allow the private sector to put up, businesses or commercial activities or heck, even retail stores? I mean, wouldn't that raise a lot of money for the is that a bad idea or a good idea?
I think it definitely makes sense to be more creative in terms of the development of the stops right on the turnpike and maybe some of the ancillary development opportunities you're talking about. Basically, the services directly on the turnpike now aren't that different than they were 20, 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. But we all know that there are all kinds of shopping outlets where you have these high-end eating options, for example, or even some shopping options. So I think you're right.
Yeah, but my point is that right now it's only a transit. You use it while in transit. Is it not possible to allow it to be used for a stop itself? I mean, you get on a turnpike to go to some place specifically as opposed to just passing through? I mean, I don't know. I'm not in marketing. But it seemed to me that you get into Philadelphia, you get out near Pittsburgh where you've got some urban centers, you've got shopping centers and malls almost adjacent. You're driving on a turnpike and you go by them.
No, I think you're right. So you're taking us back to the old railroad hotels.
Yeah.
Where right on the big stations you have a classy hotel. I think there's some options there and there's some revenue there.
Yeah. Well, before you go, I want to ask you, one of the things that you do in particular is as a research center, think tank, you produce papers, you think a lot about, about public policy, particularly where workers and capital meet, if I can just put it in that way. And you talk a good bit about the broken link between sort of those at the top and those at the bottom, just to put it bluntly, those who produce and those who, on the capital side and the worker side. Just briefly explain where you are with that.
Sure. What we focused on recently is the broken link between productivity growth and wages. We've got a strong economy, have had now for 4 or 5 years, and also, if you look for a longer period, 25 years. But even though productivity growth has been very healthy, profits have been at record levels the last 5 years, wages, income, health coverage, pension coverage have lagged.
Yeah.
And actually people know why. We're in a global economy. There's a set of forces that are pushing down on the middle class in Pennsylvania. And so far, our public policy really hasn't adequately stepped back from that historic challenge and helped the state and helped the people of the state deal with that transition. So we think now there's been a lot more acknowledgement recently across the political spectrum, even President Bush and his Treasury Secretary talking about inequality.
I noticed that health care costs only went up about 4% last year, was good news. And there's some indication that wage wages are going up. But you're talking about a more structural problem that deals with the international, with the global economy, as opposed to something that's going on even
I mean,
nationally.
if you look at wages for 25 years, right in the middle of the distribution in Pennsylvania, there's really only one 4 or 5 year period in the second half of the 90s when they went up steadily a couple % a year, right? So over the long period, the benefits of growth in this country and state have been very skewed at the top. We need to take a look at that.
Before you go, I want to ask you about Governor Rendell. Governor Rendell has a certain philosophy, I think, a little bit like other governors, but maybe even more so, where, you know, investing billions and billions of dollars into all sorts of different things. I wish sometimes, and some people do, then, you know, some of the investments are kind of willy-nilly at the whim of certain legislators as opposed to systematically placed. But probably more investment in Governor Rendell's first 4 years than any other governor, that at least I think in history. What's your sense about that?
I think that's right, and I think Rendell has taken some important steps. We actually need to go further. He's investing in the future. He's investing in education and workforce skills. He now wants to invest more in health benefits. He's invested in job creation. We're having a debate today about investing in the transportation infrastructure.
Right.
That's been missing. If you're going to deal with a global economy and come out with a strong economy but also a strong middle class, you're going to have to make investments, you know, in the future. That side of the conversation has been missing, and thanks in part to Governor Rendell, that side has come back.
We only have about 30 seconds. The critics say that's just indebting the state down the line to pay these bills, larger and larger share of the state budget, I don't know, $500–600 million, you know, as that debt gets amortizing.
Look, if you think you're going to deal with globalization, with a decaying infrastructure, with more than half your workforce having only a high school education, and with your companies bearing the burden of health care costs on their backs as they try to compete with China, I think you're smoking something.
Well, it's a good point, Dad. I mean, we have a lot of small business guys on this, men and women on this program. They want the health care monkey off their back. They can't afford, you know, $12,000 and $13,000 per person to cover. I think on that, everybody's looking for a solution.
Canada, Japan, many European countries, companies don't shoulder the burden of health care costs. That makes sense.
All right, Stephen, thank you. We'll be back. Oil company gross profits tax. It's an idea that's been suggested by Governor Rendell. Some people don't like that. We're going to hear from one gentleman who thinks it's a bad idea when we return.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association, Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money, and by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education, 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, look, we've had the governor on Pennsylvania Newsmakers talking about his idea with leasing the Turnpike. If that doesn't work, he has said maybe we ought to tax oil company gross profits. He's made a big deal of that. In the midst of this discussion, however, there are Pennsylvania oil and gas companies that might get dragged into this tax. And to talk about it today, we have Stephen Rhoads, who's the president of the Pennsylvania Oil and Gas Association. Stephen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Look, boy, I'll tell you, this is something very fascinating, and I want you to explain why when Governor Rendell came on and other folks in the administration have talked about these 7 oil companies, national and international companies, why this could all involve Pennsylvania-owned oil and gas association operations in the state. I want you to talk about that. But first, who are you and why should we care about this?
Well, I represent the independent oil and gas companies that operate in Pennsylvania, the people who produce our own indigenous crude oil and natural gas. There are quite a few hundred companies that operate in western, northern, and central Pennsylvania counties that are involved in this industry. They drill wells, they invest in money in salaries, wages, and other activities to explore for and find new new natural gas and crude oil reserves in the state, they're also paying a considerable amount of money to Pennsylvania landowners in the form of royalties from the production that we generate in the state. We're a relatively small industry when you compare it nationwide.
To the big oil companies.
Oh, yeah. For example, we produce 2 million barrels of oil a year in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. Now, you contrast that with Texas. Texas produces 7.5 million barrels a day.
Okay.
So it's a substantially different industry.
And we import, if I understand this correctly, about 1 billion barrels of oil into the state every year.
Yeah, it's pretty substantial.
Yeah.
The real strength of our industry in Pennsylvania is the natural gas side.
Right.
We're producing about 168 billion cubic feet of gas a year in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. Again, on the scale on the national scale, it's relatively small, but the volume is enough to satisfy about 25% of our own home energy demand here in the state.
That's pretty significant.
Yeah, it is significant. What we have here with the governor's proposal is, he characterizes it as an attempt to bring in new money, corporate net income tax money that's not been paid by the large multinational oil companies for business activities they carry out in the state.
Right.
And he wants to use this creative technique called combined reporting to essentially make these large companies look at every facet of their business and report every piece of profit and then tax on that basis.
All right. Now, the way he's explained this, and you correct me if I'm wrong, there are 7 oil companies that do major national, international oil companies that do business in Pennsylvania. He says they avoid tax.
They avoid their corporate net income tax
liability. Corporate net income tax by what is referred to as creative bookkeeping. We'll leave it at that. We don't have to get into details of that.
Well, for me, that's beside the point.
All right. All right. His point is they should be paying that tax. Your point is you're being dragged into that net.
The way we just saw the draft legislation for the first time, the enabling legislation for this tax for the first time on Monday. And while it seems pretty obvious that he wants to tax these companies in the way he talks, the bill casts a much wider net.
Okay.
And it would bring in all of our Pennsylvania companies as well. It would even bring in it appears that it would bring in companies that are exempt from the corporate net income tax, which raises questions of double taxation and a variety of other issues. The combined reporting aspect of this bill would bring in all of Pennsylvania's natural gas production as well.
All right, we're going to go to a break. This is an important topic. We've tried on Pennsylvania Newsmakers to get different points of view. This is certainly one that I don't think a lot of folks, when the governor first made this proposal, thought very much about. Stephen Rhoads is the president of the Pennsylvania Oil and Gas Association. He's our guest today, and we'll continue this discussion after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Builders Association, building today for a better tomorrow. And by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers with Stephen Rhoads from the Pennsylvania Oil and Gas Association. We're talking about Governor Rendell's proposal to tax the oil profits of seven large national and international oil companies. Could be dragging the Pennsylvania oil and gas operators in the state under that ambit. Stephen is chatting with us about the implications of that. All right, now, I want to repeat this. You're being dragged into it because of the way the legislation is being written and the fact that the tax would fall under corporate entities that would apply to folks in your organization.
It would apply to non-corporate entities as well. And I don't know how much you want to get into that. The industry is mostly subchapter S corporations and partnerships.
And all that income falls to individuals.
Right.
So they would get to pay it. And so in other words,
they would get to pay it as well as the company under the gross profits tax.
Under the normal income business tax that these companies would pay.
Yes.
All right. Now, I want to go to another thing. I want you, as clearly as you can, and you've been really clear about this, which is important. Why is this important to the economy, particularly of, you get out west, I mean, I know, counties like Indiana, I don't know where else, Westmoreland, Cambria,
McKean, Warren.
McKean. These are rural. We're always talking about rural needs. Rural needs. Why, in your judgment, does this tax, if you get brought under it, is this going to affect rural counties?
In 2005, which is the last year we have any real data on production and prices at the wellhead, okay, the industry at large, from the sales of natural gas and crude oil in Pennsylvania's own resources,
right.
Had a gross income, I should say, of about $1.6 billion. This proposal, if the governor put it on the oil and gas industry in the state, would generate about $99 million in tax revenue in 2005 if it were in place then. Mm-hmm. That's $99 million that would be shifted out of the economies of rural, western, and northern Pennsylvania communities to subsidize services in southern and eastern urban centers and suburban communities. That's a major shift of capital out of economies that don't have the economic base that is as robust as those that are down in the southern and eastern portions of the state. All of the money that the independent producers earn from their production in Pennsylvania is pretty much reinvested back in those communities. Every time we drill a well, we are hiring local contractors and buying materials from supply stores that are local. We have drilling companies that are local, well service companies.
Right.
All of these people are part of the local economy.
So your point is that you're major players in the economies of many of the small towns like Bradford and others around the state, that this tax is going to significantly affect what you're able to do to help those.
It's going to significantly
employment.
It will curtail the investment of this capital back in those communities.
All right. Look, this is on this program we try to present alternative points of view. This is one, quite frankly, that I was not didn't even think of. Stephen Rhoads, thanks for coming on the program. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and stay well.